Story 1. I have 5 nipples, 3 on the right and 2 on the left. I call the unpaired one Lonely Tim. The others do not have names because they do not need them. They have each other. Story 2. I have sectoral heterochromia, which means one of my eyes has blue and brown colors split down the middle. My other eye is brown. Story 3. I have Graves' disease. My eyes protrude more than they should, and I experience irregular heartbeats all the time. Story 4. I have a rare genetic disorder called congenital central hypoventilation syndrome, also known as Ondine's curse. I do not breathe when I am unconscious or asleep, so I have a tracheotomy and use a ventilator at night. I am fine during the day. Only about 2,000 people in the world have it. One unusual thing about my body is that I can make my tongue go vertical. Story 5. My grandmother has dextrocardia, meaning her heart is on the right side of her chest and points to the right instead of the left. It never caused her any problems, and she did not know she had it until she had a heart attack in her mid-80s and required surgery. She is now in her 90s and still going strong. Story 6. I found out during treatment for my back after a car accident that I have an extra lumbar vertebra. As a larger man, this makes shopping for shirts a real pain. Story 7. When I drink very cold water, I can feel it travel up into my ears. It does not leak out, but when I use a cotton swab, the tip comes out damp. Story 8. I get more kidney stones than the average person. Started when I was 16, and now I pass a couple of them every month. Story 9. I have a lazy eye, also called strabismus. It is not fun and it wrecks my self-confidence, to be honest. I had surgery when I was 3. It worked for about 10 years, then slowly returned. Story 10. I am tied for the world's longest toes. I thought they were about 3.6 inches, but they are 5 inches. Story 11. I have very poor circulation in my hands, so they are cold all the time, not just a little cold, but shockingly cold. I am allergic to metal. I also have the sun sneeze reflex and am unable to tan. Story 12. My calf muscles never stop moving, even when I am sleeping or sitting. The muscles twitch and glide under the skin. No doctor has been able to determine the cause. It appears to be genetic because my father's legs do the same. Story 13. It got to the point where I ate excessive amounts of fried chicken for a long time, and it made me sick to my stomach. Story 14. I have very wide feet. The girth is larger than the length of my foot. I do not like shoes. Story 15. I was born with a submucous cleft palate and 2 uvulas. It was not visible on my face, but it profoundly affected my speech and was surgically corrected when I was 6. Even then, I needed more than a decade of speech therapy to speak normally. I have more than 40 scars on the roof of my mouth. I have an identical twin sister who did not have the same structural issue. She acquired my speech impediment by learning to speak alongside me. We were featured in a medical journal because, before us, researchers believed this type of speech pattern had to stem from a structural difference. Story 16. My toes are long and scraggly, and I can pick things up with them. Story 17. I cannot absorb many nutrients. I am being treated for iron deficiency, osteoporosis that may be due to calcium or vitamin D deficiency, vitamin K and vitamin B deficiencies, and sodium deficiency. I take a multivitamin to try to cover the rest. I overeat but remain quite slim, and I struggle to build muscle. Previously, it was suggested I might have celiac disease. Tests were negative. I went gluten-free for a couple of months, but my iron levels did not improve and my mental state worsened. Some deficiencies, particularly sodium and vitamin K, are likely related to medications I take. Story 18. My breasts were excessively large. Everyone reassured me that breastfeeding would reduce them and that I would end up at a reasonable size. Instead, they became larger and never decreased. Story 19. I've been told by tailors and shoe store staff that my body has very unusual proportions. Normally, there are ratios between certain measurements. For example, if your neck size is a certain value, your shoulder and chest sizes are expected to correspond. The same applies to my feet. Length, width, and arch height are not in proportion. This means that whatever I buy, one area will not fit correctly. Story 20. I have an extra set of ribs at the top of my rib cage called cervical ribs. They are tiny nubs but long enough to put pressure on the thoracic outlet, the bundle of nerves and blood vessels between the neck and the shoulder, causing thoracic outlet syndrome. The cervical ribs can occasionally compress the nerves, causing severe shoulder pain, and can compress blood vessels, reducing circulation to my arms and hands. Story 21. Superior semicircular canal dehiscence syndrome means I have a small hole in the bone around one of my inner ear canals. Because of this, I am very sensitive to sounds, both external noises and some internal sounds. For example, I can hear my heartbeat or the movement of my eyes, which can feel strange. Everyday sounds, such as dishes clinking or someone speaking loudly, can seem excessively loud and even physically uncomfortable. This condition can be present from birth, result from an injury, or develop with age. There are treatments and management strategies that can help if it becomes bothersome. Story 22. I see color radiate from objects. For example, if I see a block of cheese, I will see a glowing red outline around it. It does not correspond to weather, the object, or anything else. It just happens all the time. The colors are random. Story 23. Whenever I sneeze, it is uncontrollable. 8 to 10 sneezes in a row. I call it a sneezer. Story 24. The ulnae in both my arms are swapped. Half of my left forearm is in my right arm, and half of my right forearm is in my left arm. This is a congenital defect. I can only lift about half the weight of an average person my size because one of the attachment sites for the arm muscles is missing. A bony prominence is oriented toward the radius, producing a kind of double elbow. Story 25. I cannot move my middle finger separately from my index finger. Story 26. I have a traumatic brain injury that primarily affects my sight and also affects my emotions, speech, and my left arm slightly. Story 27. I heal very fast. Broken bones completely heal in 3 to 4 weeks. Stitches are removed after 4 days, leaving no scars. My thumbs are not opposable. Story 28. My skull and the first and second cervical vertebrae are fused. I cannot turn my neck or look up or down. I can only look straight ahead. Story 29. There is a white streak in my hair. It is right at the front, and no one else in my family has anything like it. Story 30. Visual snow. Think of the white and black static from old-school analog TV. It is most noticeable in a dark room at night and also when I close my eyes. Story 31. I am extremely flat-footed. I almost stand on my inner ankles. I also have heterochromia. My eyes are hazel with the lower quarter of my right eye brown. I tell people it is because I am so full of it. Story 32. I have never been sunburned or burned, and I have never needed sunscreen. I feel the heat, but it has never left a mark and it does not bother me as much as it probably should. I like to say I am fire resistant. Story 33. I have one kidney. I do not have a gallbladder. I am missing a parathyroid gland. I have several extra splenic nodules. Story 34. My left love handle is about 1 inch larger than my right, even when I am in shape. When I tuck in shirts, a 3 to 4 inch section of my waist is larger than the rest, causing it to spill over and sometimes roll the waistband of my pants on that side. Story 35. I have 2 small holes at the top of my buttock crease, just above the coccyx, one on each buttock. They look as if 2 piercings had been removed. One hole is more hollow than the other. I was born with them and have never known anyone with a similar condition. My guess is a malformation of the spinal cord, but I do not know. Story 36. I have polycystic ovary syndrome. I take daily medication to regulate my hormones. Because of it, I had severe acne from my teenage years into adulthood, which caused many scars on my chest and face. My entire chin is also covered in bumps from the scarring. Story 37. I can urinate in 3 different directions almost every time. Story 38. Everything hurts. I am 21 years old. This cannot be normal. Story 39. My thumbs do not match. The thumbnail on the right looks like a windshield. Story 40. The 3 lowest ribs on my right side are compressed inward from a tubing accident. I also have an extra bone in my left ankle. Story 41. I have a body part that is approximately 5 times larger than that of the average female. Story 42. I sneeze after drinking a certain amount of alcohol. It is my body telling me I have reached my limit. Story 43. Massive swelling of my knuckle after a ball was kicked into my hand. Story 44. I have median arcuate ligament syndrome, which is terrible for many reasons, but it is interesting that I can see my pulse across my entire abdomen. When it is really fast, it looks like an alien trying to bust out. Story 45. When I close my right hand, my pinky covers my ring finger. I can thank a boxing fracture for that. Story 46. I am partially clubfoot. I am mostly fine, just clumsy, and I have never been able to wear high heels. I had surgery in 2022, but it did not help much. Story 47. I have had many varicose and spider veins on my legs since an early age. I do not show them to anyone. Story 48. I have a duplicated inferior vena cava. It is probably why I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Story 49. I have been missing an adult tooth since birth and I do not have any wisdom teeth. I am missing certain finger joints and one finger, my index finger, is much shorter than the others. When people introduce me to new people, they tell me to show them my thumb. In school, I learned that my torso is unusually long for my height. I have the torso of someone who would be 5 feet 8 inches while I am 5 feet 1 inch. I have thin blonde eyebrows despite dark brown hair, and I am almost hairless except on my head. I also have a breast condition that makes my breasts swell when I consume too much sugar or caffeine, when I am sick, or sometimes around my menstruation. I am very unusual. Story 50. My daughter has a genetic disorder called Klippel-Trenaunay-Weber syndrome. The entire right side of her body, including internal organs, is larger than the left. She has a mild case but was recently diagnosed with leukemia, and doctors do not know if the two conditions are related. She has port wine birthmarks on her face and back. She is an anomaly to her oncology team. Story 51. I can voluntarily produce a sensation like electric shocks throughout my body using my mind. I do not know how to explain it. Story 52. I have keloid scarring. I try to be very careful to avoid injury and do not pick at scabs. Story 53. On my left foot, my second toe has 2 nails but only 1 joint. Story 54. I have a dent on my tibia. I have never broken or fractured it. Story 55. I can lick my nose if I want to. Back in college, I practiced stretching my tongue so much that I could lick my elbow, but I can't do that anymore because it was only useful for winning bets and getting free drinks. I also used to be able to crack a walnut between my cheeks and thighs. I can't do that anymore. That is more due to my back being injured in a car accident, which prevented me from working out, and also due to getting older. Story 56. One of my eyes is brown while the other is hazel. The hazel eye is very close to brown, so the difference is usually hard to notice. Story 57. My brain and stomach cannot seem to communicate. For example, I will eat dinner and feel so full, as if I am about to burst, whether I overeat or not. I go to bed still feeling full and wake the next morning with the same sensation. Then suddenly I become starving. I do not even get a neutral feeling. Story 58. I have unusually wide shoulders for my weight. I often struggle to find clothing that fits between medium and large. Story 59. I have this weird extra toe that only shows up when it's raining. I call it my weather toe. It's like my own barometer, but far less useful and much more embarrassing. Story 60. My right hip is half an inch higher, so when I walk I look like a bobblehead. Story 61. When I drink alcohol, all my lymph nodes swell and become painful. Story 62. I have a deformed thumb, brachydactyly type D, and scoliosis. Story 63. Every time I have abdominal surgery, the doctors say my intestines are stuck down. This makes the surgeries much longer and more difficult for the surgeon. Story 64. I don't know where to start with my dozens of health issues. I pass gas from my stomach because I must insert a catheter and instill 900 milliliters of soapy water using a gravity bag due to a paralyzed bowel. The gas smells much worse than normal. Story 65. My lungs are not fully developed because I was born 5 months early. Story 66. The fingers of my left hand, which is also my dominant hand, have a joint between the first and middle segments that can bend very far inward. I can also bend only the very tips of my fingers forward on both hands. Story 67. My heart beats occasionally. I get a few premature ventricular contractions from time to time. They are likely related to my gastroesophageal reflux disease, but they are not something to worry about. I also have one toe with one fewer joint than the corresponding toe on the other foot. Story 68. The entire left side of my body is affected. My left eye reacts more slowly than my right, my left eyelashes are longer than those on my right, and my left leg is longer than my right leg. Story 69. 1/3 of a lung is missing, along with parts of 3 ribs. Story 70. I have 3 hernias. My thumbs are double-jointed. I look much younger than I am, which surprises many people of the opposite sex when they discover my age. Story 71. I have 3 wisdom teeth, not 2 or 4. This is extremely uncommon. Story 72. I am not pleased with the asymmetry of my face. Story 73. I was born with shallow kneecaps. The grooves that my kneecaps sit in are not deep enough to keep them in place, so they can dislocate at any time. Strength training has helped prevent full dislocations, but they still pop and catch regularly. Story 74. I always have floaters in my eyes due to posterior vitreous detachment. Sometimes they are large and clear, and other times they are small and dark. Both types are annoying. Story 75. I sneeze every time I am full. I usually sneeze about 6 times. It is called the snatiation reflex. Story 76. My ape index, or wingspan as most people call it, is insane. I am 5 feet 6 inches, and my arms measure 6 feet 2 inches. Growing up, the joke was that I could not ride in a lowrider because my knuckles would drag on the ground. It was hilarious watching people try to take things and hold them over my head. The looks on their faces when I reached up and grabbed them were classic. For the record, I climbed rocks and swam when I was young. I still play disc golf. I do not participate in fighting or boxing. Story 77. I am a white girl of Irish, Apache, Mexican, and Hungarian heritage, and my butt is very large compared to my waist size. It sounds fun to a lot of people nowadays, but growing up it was a cause of severe body dysmorphia. Story 78. I have a shoe size of 54 in European Union sizing. 99.99% of shops do not sell shoes in my size. Story 79. I sneeze when I eat dark chocolate or minty gum. It is very annoying to have to blow black bits of chocolate out. Story 80. I have 6 fingers on my hands. The extras are perfectly functional and of normal size, so it is a win. They give the best back scratches. Story 81. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobile type. My arms and legs sometimes partially dislocate, and it is extremely painful. Story 82. My immune system works overtime when needed. My wife catches all sorts of colds and illnesses. I give her a kiss even at her worst, and I only end up with a few sniffles. Story 83. I have a deep scar from chest tubes. When I dated a woman, she had chest tubes at birth, which left a scar on her breast. She was very sensitive, but I thought it was interesting that our scars matched. Story 84. My father, who would be 93 if he were still alive, could not wear a Timex or any inexpensive watch. Within a week or 2 they stopped working. There were many theories, but some suggested that he somehow magnetized the watch movements. Story 85. I have no knuckle joint on either ring finger. The fingers are a segment shorter than they should be, and the missing segment is what would have been the ring knuckle, also known as the base. When I make a fist, there is a dip where there should be a knuckle. In grade school, we played a game I cannot recall the name of, where losing points meant the winner could painfully flick a quarter into the loser's knuckles. You had to place your knuckles flat on the desk. I was never afraid of this game because my missing knuckle created a space that the quarter would fall into about half the time since everyone aimed for the middle. The quarter would harmlessly lodge under my folded ring finger and I felt no pain. Story 86. My skull is a little thicker than normal. Saved my life when I fell off a cliff. Story 87. I have polymorphous light eruption, which means when my skin is exposed to the summer sun, I get a severe heat rash. It usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes for a rash to appear, and it is almost always on my legs and feet. I have to wear thick zinc sunscreen and reapply it frequently. Story 88. My hip joints became deformed, and I have an extra bone in my left hip. My movement is now severely limited at age 32, and I will have to have 2 separate hip surgeries. My hip angles are 10 degrees off on both sides. Story 89. My 4th toe on each foot is positioned irregularly, resting on top of the 3rd toe. This trait was inherited from my mother's side and causes a cleft to develop. The toes on both feet have not grown properly. Story 90. I have armpit breast tissue. It is small right now, but if I gain weight, it can look like a large lump. When I was pregnant, the tissue in my armpits filled with breast milk. It was awful. Story 91. My scalp sweats in anticipation of eating anything spicy. Then I start eating and everything is normal. Story 92. My pinkies are slightly bent. When I hold them up together, they are symmetrical. I don't know why. I never broke them. My dad had the same trait. Story 93. I can bend my left little finger 90 degrees backward. My right leg is 1.5 centimeters longer than my left. My right foot is 1 size larger than my left. Story 94. When I was younger, my vaginal opening did not open all the way naturally. It was shaped like the number 8. Medical providers applied a hormone cream when I was old enough to ask what was happening, and it then opened completely. Story 95. My little toes are tucked under my 4th toes on both feet, a condition known as hammer toes. It has been like that since birth. Story 96. I have hydrocephalus. When I was a child, I had 3 front teeth on the top of my jaw. They were baby teeth. As an adult, I have 2 front teeth and a gap the size of a baby tooth. I am hypermobile. My skin is somewhat stretchy. Story 97. I tore the meniscus in my knee when I stood up from a crouch. Story 98. I have 2 ureters on my left kidney. Story 99. I have to think really hard to tell right from left. Story 100. I have what I can only describe as monk constitution. I have a metabolism that lets me go a day or 2 without eating, a liver that processes alcohol like a Russian alcoholic. I barely need to sleep, and I look younger than I am. Sounds like superpowers, doesn't it? Well, it isn't, because God also blessed me with several painful defects like ingrown toenails, an allergy and immunity to most conventional anesthesia, and the not needing to eat trait is only good until you realize it makes you look like a malnourished skeleton. So even though I don't need to eat much, I checked with doctors. I have to eat a lot more than a normal person so I don't look malnourished. I also never gain weight, so there's that. There are several other minor issues I won't list because they are common or not impressive. I have several abnormalities, and many of them are problematic. Story 101. I have hyperhidrosis, which means I sweat an excessive amount and I hate it. It is my biggest insecurity, and there is not much I can do to get rid of it. Story 102. According to my orthodontist and dentist, I have one of the smallest mouths they have ever seen. I have to brush with children's toothbrushes. I am 32. Story 103. My left shoulder is higher than my right, and I can also see a difference in my ribs. Story 104. I have a chronic illness that causes stomach acid to reach the back of my throat. My body produces mucus in that area, which makes me feel like there is always a lump in my throat and often causes gagging and sometimes vomiting. Daily tasks feel impossible. My ear, nose, and throat specialist said it is probably not fatal and is unlikely to get worse. Story 105. Oh boy, there are some odd traits I inherited. I inherited larger calves from my dad, so they are a bit bigger than they should be. My dad had blood clots in his calves because he was a runner and his calf muscles were too large, so now I triple check any pain in my calf muscles. Another trait from my dad is unusual teeth. My lateral incisors are located where canines usually are, and my canines are retained baby teeth with no adult replacements. They are supposed to last until about age 40, apparently. I am also missing all my wisdom teeth, and I read that this may be associated with a higher risk of colon cancer. Finally, I have essentially non-existent grooves under my kneecaps. Those grooves are supposed to keep kneecaps in place, so I have dislocated a knee now and then. Story 106. Not my body. I dream in song. At least once a week, I wake up with the Bologna commercial playing in my head. I've never dreamed about Bologna, but my dreams are all in song. Story 107. I trimmed off the side of my right index finger with a table saw. Story 108. I bleed from my belly button almost all the time, and it gets worse during my menstrual period. Story 109. My uvula has 2 tips. The best way I can think to describe it, unfortunately, is that it is shaped like a nutsack. Story 110. Our brains do not only form new connections right after birth. Another process, neural pruning, removes connections that are not needed. For some reason, pruning in my brain did not work well. I have connections between the regions that process sound and those that process touch that most people do not have. When I hear sounds, the signal goes to the auditory cortex as usual, but it also reaches areas that normally process touch. Those touch regions do not know what to do with auditory signals, so they interpret them as touch. Different sounds produce different tactile sensations in different parts of my body. I can recognize sounds by how they make my body feel as easily as by how they sound. Most of the time, the sensations are mild and unremarkable, like feeling the shoes I am wearing. Some sounds can cause pain, so I have to move away from them. Other sounds feel wonderful. Imagine listening to your favorite song and receiving a massage that moves in time with the music. That is the world I live in every day. Story 111. I have a sacral dimple. The top 40% of my butt crack appears fused. Story 112. I have a unique form of neurofibromatosis. Fortunately, it is an extremely mild form that causes almost no visible marks. Story 113. My color vision changes with sun exposure. When I wake after sleeping outside, colors are washed out briefly. Once, after facing the rising sun the whole time, my vision was completely grayscale for about 10 seconds before color returned. Story 114. When I was 13, I took a knee to my thigh during a soccer game. The bruise was so bad I could not put weight on the leg for a day. I still have an indent in my leg where it happened. I am 24. Story 115. I have what I call a wiggle spot on my back. I received acupuncture several times after a car accident. When a needle is placed near that spot, it causes that part of my back to twitch, and the twitching travels down my right leg. It's odd. Story 116. My uncle was hit by a boat. A muscle in the front of his leg was replaced with a calf muscle. When the front is poked, he feels it in the back. Story 117. Several generations of my family on my mom's side have bent pinky fingers. This includes me, my brother, my nephew, my mom, my granddad, and my great-nana. It is possible that earlier generations also had this trait. My sister-in-law has bent index fingers, so my nephew has both bent pinky and index fingers. My mom and I have a sacral dimple. Story 118. Male, 21 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall and 120 pounds. Skinny person who cannot gain weight or height. Rough life out here. Story 119. I had an extra baby tooth when I was a kid. I have never had any wisdom teeth removed, but I only have the top right and bottom left. These teeth have never erupted through my gums and are sideways. The other 2 wisdom teeth never developed. Story 120. I have 2 supernumerary nipples. One looks like you would expect a standard scaramanga bud beneath one of my male breasts, and the other is further down, looking even less like a nipple. I was a very sickly child and had chickenpox 3 times, even though you are supposed to get it only once. Story 121. I think my penis is 7¼ inches long. That's large, right? Story 122. I had my colon removed years ago and I have a permanent ileostomy. Have you heard of phantom limb syndrome? People like me who have had their rectums removed can experience a phantom rectum. It even sounds like an insult. The monarch calls it phantom limb in the Venture Brothers. I laughed out loud. Story 123. I mostly grew out of it, but I used to have an allergic skin reaction to cold air or cold water. I became very itchy and then developed large welts, and afterwards I would feel like I had the flu. I used to joke that I had caught a chill, but it was very uncomfortable, and I had to take Benadryl before swimming in a lake or similar activities. Story 124. My feet are not properly balanced, so I need special inserts to compensate. Standing barefoot is somewhat painful for me. Story 125. I was born with a double hernia and we should have bought the extended warranty on my pancreas. Story 126. Due to a childhood injury, my right middle finger is wider than my left middle finger. Story 127. I have Kallman syndrome and did not go through normal puberty. I must take testosterone for life because my body does not produce it naturally. Story 128. I have an empty cella, so unfortunately I have fat in unusual places. Story 129. This is not a medical condition. I can touch my tongue to my nose. I am double-jointed in most of my fingers, including my thumbs. My knees and elbows slightly hyperextend, which sometimes makes standing or raising my hand painful. Story 130. I have petaloid toenails. It's the second tiny toenail on my pinky toe. It's entertaining to watch the pedicurist try to figure out what is going on. Story 131. My knees are incredibly double-jointed. I have to watch how I am standing in pictures or they look really weird. Story 132. My ear piercing closes in 2 to 3 days if I do not wear studs. To be honest, it makes things difficult. I have pierced my ear 3 times and am going to pierce it a 4th time because the holes keep closing. Story 133. I have only 3 wisdom teeth. I hear missing wisdom teeth are increasingly common, but my body decided that was enough. Story 134. Oh boy, here we go. I have natural monovision. I can pop my joints out of their sockets at will. I am hyperflexible. I have such good hearing that I can identify voices from half a mile away, but I cannot hear people in loud places. I am unable to smile because of the shape of my mouth due to Native American ancestry. I am among the unfortunate 0.1% of people who experience cluster migraines. Story 135. I'm a 5-foot 5-inch woman with joints about the size of the average 6-foot man. My doctor and I discovered this when I could not find a knee guard that would fit, so she measured my knees and all my other joints. She told me that my joints are about the size of a tall man. Laughing out loud. Apparently being big-boned is a real thing, but it does not mean you are overweight. I have never been overweight in my life, but this explains why I have always weighed more than I appear. I have never broken a bone either, despite several occasions when I probably could have. Story 136. The 2 sides of my body developed differently. This shows in various ways. One breast is a different size and shape than the other, with an entire cup size difference. One half of my brain is larger than the other, visible on computed tomography scans. The inside of my eyes and their vascular structures differ, even though they are supposed to be the same. The left eye is partially paralyzed. One side of my torso is more curved than the other. The entire left side tends to react to or process stimuli slightly differently than the right. Even as a child, I have always felt like 2 souls in one body. Story 137. Nothing unusual now that they make Magnum condoms. I hate it when I drop them at the store, though. Story 138. I have 2 rare syndromes that affect me constantly. Horner syndrome and first bite syndrome. This makes eating in front of new people a debacle every time. Story 139. I have an arachnoid cyst and as a result hear a constant chorus of crickets. I can tell audibly when I am becoming unbalanced. Story 140. My ribs occasionally dislocate. It started after I tried to jump a chain link fence and fell onto concrete. We tried putting them back into place, but they never healed properly. Now if I get hit in the ribs hard enough, for example by a door swinging open, they will dislocate and I have to wait for them to move back into place. Story 141. I think I have an unusually powerful voice. I use it carefully and can draw on any emotion to charge a conversation or scene and influence others. I pay close attention to the psychology behind my words and the feelings I want to evoke. Sometimes I feel like a siren. able to draw anyone in with my voice. Being able to mimic any human emotion at any moment offers many strengths and benefits. Story 142. I have centralized heterochromia, mostly blue with a little green in the center. I also have particularly sharp canines. Story 143. I have 3 spleens. About 15% of people have accessory spleens, so it is not that rare. Story 144. I have elf-shaped ears. They are very prominent. Nobody else in my family has them. I used to hate them growing up because I was made fun of and hid them behind my hair. Turns out my boyfriend loves them. He intentionally tucks my hair behind my ears so he can see them, and he says it is his favorite thing about me. I dislike them a little less now. Story 145. I have anisocoria due to AD syndrome. My left pupil is very slow to dilate, while my right pupil behaves normally. It does not cause me any health issues. It looks strange when it happens, and people have commented on my uneven pupils. It generally appears after a sudden change in lighting. David Bowie also had a type of anisocoria, but his was caused by physical trauma to the eye. Story 146. I have convergence insufficiency, which means I struggle to focus on close-up objects or experience severe eye strain when I read for long periods. My eyes do not work together well. I have worn prism glasses for 20 years, and they greatly improve my comfort. Story 147. I have full control of the eustachian tubes in my ears. Positive. I can tune into my body's sounds much more easily. Negative. I have to remember to flex them when elevation changes because they do not pop on their own. Story 148. It is not really uncommon, but I have a pair of black heart birthmarks. My nostrils are triangular. Story 149. I have to carve out both of my big toenails about once a month. Story 150. I have never bled more than 2 drops during my period. I get severe cramping, though. Story 151. When I was 7, a storm drain cover fell on my hand while I was looking for bugs. My little finger is hooked at the end with no tendons, and the middle knuckle was crushed, so it is useless. I also lost a leg. Story 152. One side of my collarbone near my right shoulder is bumpier and more protruding than the other, like a knobby end that pokes the skin. Story 153. When I was born, my blood type was a negative. Now my blood type is O negative. I am missing part of my skull. Story 154. I have 47 chromosomes. I am in my 40s and look like I am in my mid-20s. It was cool for a while, but I now hate my appearance. Story 155. I have a second set of DNA. I am a tetragametic chimera, a fusion of 2 twins at a very early stage that results in 2 distinct sets of DNA distributed across my body. Story 156. I have peripheral neuropathy. I cannot feel my feet, so toy bricks on the floor are of no consequence to me. I can slip out of handcuffs easily, and the last time I was arrested the police had to secure my hands with zip ties. Story 157. I am 4 feet 9 inches tall, which puts me in the bottom 1% of fully grown adults who do not have a diagnosable form of dwarfism. I am proportioned like an average-sized person, just very small. Story 158. I was born with a cleft palate, so I do not have a uvula. A few years ago, I found my medical records and discovered I had been diagnosed with Pierre-Robin syndrome at birth. I had never heard of it until then and do not know whether it was a clerical error or if I actually have it. Story 159. My nose is made out of Gore-Tex and I'm in medical journals. Story 160. I can turn my leg completely backward. I do not show it off as much because I have a cyst in my knee. Story 161. I had a hole in my lung when I was born. As I grew, it healed and became a tiny spot. I was diagnosed with growth hormone deficiency, which caused short stature, and I later took medication to help me grow. I also have sensory processing disorder, which has affected me greatly. It is not as severe as when I was younger, but I still struggle with certain things. Story 162. I have a hammer toe. My right little toe curves inward and the nail grows upward. I do not like it because it causes me to put more weight on the side of my foot, and it hurts when I wear shoes. It does not help that I have wide feet. Story 163. I have B negative blood, which is fairly rare. Less than 2% of people have it. It is in high demand, but I cannot donate because I am contaminated in 6 ways. Story 164. I have 2 uvulas in my throat. One is normal size but sits at an angle. The second is attached beside it and is small and round. Story 165. With hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there is something wrong with every one of my connective tissue cells. Story 166. My anus burns immediately when I drink White Claw or Smirnoff. I have never been able to figure out why. Story 167. Uneven skin tone. I'm light all over except my elbows, knees, knuckles, and ankles, which are darker. Story 168. My brain and body cannot regulate when I should sleep or be awake, and it is terrible. I have been diagnosed with narcolepsy. Story 169. I have a vertebra that is twice the length it should be and forms an extra joint with my hip. I am double-jointed and hypermobile. I can bend the tips of my fingers independently of my other knuckles. I can touch the tip of my nose with my tongue. Story 170. When we become ill from external sources, we may not realize it, but our immune system protects us. Story 171. My elbows bend slightly backward. I have always been naturally flexible, not at contortionist levels, but I never stretch and can still put my foot behind my head. It makes it more impressive because I am a man. Story 172. My brain. I live with high-functioning autism, depression, and anxiety. I take medications, exercise, and eat a healthy diet to regulate my mood. Women on both sides of my family are susceptible to dementia. Story 173. I can see ultraviolet light, hear supersonic sounds, and feel pain all over my body unless I am in a chamber pressurized to at least 2 bars. Story 174. My right leg is slightly longer than my left, which affects how I walk and how long I can stand. Story 175. I was born with an extra finger on each hand. Both were removed when I was a baby, but I can still wiggle the small stump on my right hand. Story 176. My grandfather was born with 1 kidney. Doctors did not discover it until he underwent a scan in his 50s. Story 177. I am red-green colorblind. I am permanently thin. I have thick hair but severe dandruff. I can pop my ankle at will. Story 178. I am about 6 feet tall and very thin. My arms look very long, like the 7-Up icon. Story 179. I am a 21-year-old woman. I am 6 feet 4 inches and can do center splits with my feet over my head. Story 180. You know how people say Giannis Antetokounmpo has a long wingspan? I have an even greater difference between my height and my wingspan. I am 5 feet 9 inches tall. My arms are really long and I feel like an orangutan sometimes. Story 181. I have sesamoid bones in all possible locations. My bones are maxed out. Story 182. It was fairly innocuous. I have a freckle on my eyeball. I had not known about it for a long time, so I asked an optometrist and they said it was harmless. Story 183. My left leg is a tiny bit longer than my right leg. I have fungus on both my toenails. Story 184. Claw toes. My tendons did not grow with the rest of me, so my toes never lay flat. I had corrective surgery to release the tendons when I was a teenager. I now have scars above each toe, and most of them lie flat so I can wear regular shoes. The little toes, however, still stick up and are loose because they have no tendons, so they wiggle around. Story 185. Onychotillomania. I constantly pick at my fingernails, so I have no nails. I am getting better at avoiding the behavior. I have done this since I was very young, and I have no idea how it started. Story 186. I have different-sized arms and hands on my left and right sides. My left arm and hand are larger than my right, and my left fingers are slightly longer as well. I do not know what caused this or whether it is a medical condition, but I am sure I am the first person in my family to have it. This also affects my facial symmetry. One side of my face differs slightly from the other. I have always felt very insecure about my physical asymmetry. Story 187. Man boobs. It happened when I started hormone therapy for prostate cancer. I am off it now and it is getting better, but it makes you so self-conscious. Story 188. My second toe is as long as my pinky, which is very long. Story 189. My feet differ by about half a size, and one of my ears is lower than the other. Not by much, but it makes it hard to keep my sideburns level. I have almost given up on that. Story 190. I was born with malformed knees. I can slide them in and out at will. I did it so much as a child because I thought it was a cool trick that by high school I had almost no cartilage left in my right knee, and I tore my meniscus because it was so stressed. I can also do this with my shoulders, and I used to be able to do it with my wrists and fingers. Story 191. The uppermost rib on my left side curves upward, and its tip ends just behind my clavicle, forming a bump. Also, I have a giant hog. Story 192. I can flap the top part of my left ear, and it stays that way. Sometimes I do it on purpose and then forget about it. If I do it on my right ear, it flaps right back. Story 193. Because of hypermobility, I have arthritis in my hands at 40. Awesome. One of my earlobes is attached and the other is free. One of my eyes is gray-green and the other is gray-blue. I suspect that I may be a genetic chimera. Story 194. I do not have a belly button anymore. They cut it out and threw it in the trash and did not even ask if I wanted to keep it. My appendix ruptured and had to be removed in an open procedure instead of laparoscopic surgery, and they cut right through my belly button, so I no longer have one. Story 195. I was born with 5 extra teeth, which were removed when I was 5. They were mostly front teeth and eye teeth. I developed a sizable front tooth gap and vividly recall being told my wisdom teeth would push the gap closed. At 18, my dentist laughed and said that was not possible and that my wisdom teeth would need to be removed. As a result, I am 9 teeth lighter than I was born with, though I otherwise have a very full set of teeth. Story 196. My chin is asymmetrical. The right side is slightly lower than the left. My knees can bend in the wrong direction by up to 2 degrees, and my neck spasms much more often than most people's. I must have relatively high muscle density in my legs and back, because I can fairly easily lift approximately 95% of my own weight despite never exercising. Story 197. The question is, what is not irregular? My immune system is attacking me on multiple fronts. My collagen is defective, so my joints are unstable. I literally inherited all of the recessive genes. I am allergic to sunlight and to certain metals. I cannot go outside for any length of time, and if my body is particularly reactive, I cannot use standard antiperspirant. I am allergic to an entire class of medications that would help with most of these issues. Story 198. Deceptively well endowed. I have had doctors comment on it. Story 199. I have had an elevated white blood cell count for years, and doctors do not know why. Story 200. My bones are extra dense. On the bright side, I can't really break my bones like other people do when they fall down the stairs. On the less bright side, I am unable to swim properly. Yes, I did eat a devil fruit, for those of you about to ask. Story 201. I have multiple skin conditions. Common ones are scalp psoriasis and eczema. A less common one is hidradenitis suppurativa. I also grow a lot of hair as a woman. Story 202. My lungs are larger than those of the average human and therefore hold more air. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.